Hey guys, me again. This is just a quick video on how to do the full installation of this Kegerator, fitting all the taps up and fitting all the gas lines and stuff like that for our new Series X.1 Kegerator. It's very similar to our old Series X Kegerator, but we've got a couple extra features on the X.1, so I thought I'd better do another whole video again and sort of cover the whole process just to make sure it's fresh and up to date. So when you first get the Kegerator, I want you to do one quick thing for me. Turn it around like this and you'll see the back of the unit, because I want to tip this onto its side, but I want to tip it in the most ideal orientation. So as you can see, the compressor's back here with oil essentially is in this type of sealed compressor. And what we've got is an inlet side to the compressor and an outlet side. It's safer to tip it towards the suction side on the compressor, or the inlet side. That way the oil has less chance of migrating around the rest of the refrigerant system, and therefore it's going to basically mean you're going to have less issues with noise later on. If too much oil migrates into the whole system, you can end up with a higher chance of failures. So I'm going to sort of do that. I've also got some packaging as well, so don't scratch the side of the fridge. This comes obviously normally on the base of the fridge. I'm just going to put it on the side there so it doesn't scratch, and then tip it over like this. So as you can see, I've got the fridge on its side like that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get just an 8mm socket. You can use a Phillips head screwdriver, but I find the Phillips head screwdriver sometimes rounds out the screws a little bit too much. The other thing I'll say is the wheels that come generally included with the unit look like this. These are our small 35 or 40mm diameter wheels, but look, I really enjoy using these 100mm diameter wheels. They are a bit more expensive, but they've got better bearings in there. They're a much more heavy duty wheel, and you find if you're going to be moving the Kegerator around a lot, these really are a nice sort of feature. So yeah, you have to remove the legs as well because they obstruct the wheels from properly rotating. So I'm going to take these feet out here like that. Now all the screws that come with the Kegerator, they come already in the base of the fridge. So you don't need to sort of, if you're looking for screws for these, they're not going to come in the other bag with the caster wheels. They're already on here. So just undo them like this. Okay, so as you can see, I've taken all 6 of those screws out. And there's 6 here because obviously we've got these small screws that'll go in that orientation and use those 4 holes. But then if I use the big wheels, they're going in this orientation and using these outer 4 holes because it's got a larger base plate. The other thing you might want to also remember is you've got, with these wheels, generally you've got locking and non-locking. So look, I find it a little easier to put the locking wheels near the door side, I suppose. Look, you can do whatever you want, of course, but generally because the door is going to be facing outwards, it's easier to lock them with your feet if you've got it facing in that direction. So that's what I'll do. So really straightforward, just get this on here like that and do up these 8mm or 5/16 head screws like that. So just repeat that process on each 4 corner and the wheels will be done on the base. Alrighty, now I've done videos in the past where we've used like the quad font and the tubular fonts. Like most of the less expensive fonts, to be honest with you, are the ones that just have a single tube like that and the taps come off kind of like radially in an angle like that. But one nice thing about these T-bar fonts is all the fonts are coming out straight and facing you directly at a 90-degree angle. And I kind of do prefer that. When you go a 4-tap T-font, also this is the maximum width you can go with the standard drip tray without needing to upgrade the drip tray as well. The other nice thing about the T-bar font, very easy to service. I've seen some other fonts out there where they weld all the end caps on and stuff like that. And as much as that looks pretty sleek, one of the problems is it's very, very difficult to service. You ever need to change the beer line or fix a leak or something like that, you can be in a lot of trouble if you've got a fully welded font together. So these ones actually have an end cap like this, which pulls off, and then I can easily get my hand inside like that. And if you've got big chunky hands, what you can do is also pull out the insulation. So the insulation's also in here too. One thing you'll notice is you kind of have to have the insulation once you're getting to the point where you're feeding the beer lines up there. You don't want to have to pull that out and forget to put it in, otherwise you could be in a bit of trouble. There are a lot of fonts out there which don't have any insulation at all. They really will cost you a lot more in power consumption in the long run. So, and the other thing is you'll get a lot of condensation on the font if you don't have any insulation in there too. So just good thing to remember there. So with the beer line and gas line, we give you two chunks of beer line like this and gas line. Please look carefully. We generally give you the 5mm ID by 8mm, and it says it on the line itself. It says EVABarrier 5x8. And that is the stuff you want to use for the gas. And then use the 4mm, the 4mm by 8mm for the beer. The reason why we use 4mm is we're trying to restrict and slow the flow down of the beer getting from the keg to the tap, because kegs like to sit at sort of around about 10, 12 psi. And if you've got, like, generally most beers served at that pressure, then you're going to have to really slow that beer down a fair bit. So if you accidentally use the 5mm, you would have to use almost 3 to 4 meters, but that would mean you'd have to coil up a lot of line inside the fridge. It makes it really messy. So for that reason, use the 4mm. Because I've got 4 taps here, I'm going to basically start by just cutting this into 4 equal lengths. So got the beer line out like this, and basically gonna pull the line out to sort of measure it in 4 equal lengths like this. Now you can do a little bit more balancing later on, but this is gonna get me off to a rough start. As I was saying, because the kegs like to sit at a specific pressure, you can't just fiddle around with the regulator pressure to achieve a particular flow speed out of the tap. You have to use the beer line length to adjust the speed of flow out of the tap. And we're trying to generally hit around about sort of 400 mils per 10 seconds that's milliliters per 10 seconds is what we're trying to get to. I should also say all the beer line and fittings here, we no longer use any hose clamps in the setups either. So you'll find it so easy to put these systems together because we use all the duotight fittings, duotight shanks, and even if one day you wanted to, replace the beer line or something, it's a really straightforward and quick process to do that. So yeah, I'm just basically chopping the beer line up like that. So each length will be somewhere in the vicinity of about, 1.5 to 2 meters, somewhere in that range. Generally works out pretty good. And then you can just, chop it a bit shorter. If you still feel like it's pouring a bit slow, then just trim it down a few more centimeters. Okay, so I've got my beer lines cut into 4 equal lengths. One other thing I can do, which is a little bit clever, is just reuse this zip tie here, which is on the beer line. If I cut it in the right position with my cutter here, what I can do is basically cut it so I can kind of reuse that. So I've got this bit of the zip tie now a little bit shorter, but use it to hold these beer lines together just while I push them up the font. So just go like that. Like this, and that way I can more easily just feed these up through the base of the font. So in the base you can see I've also got insulation in there, so obviously make sure to leave that in there. Then push this up the font like so. And I can see it just pop up through there. Get your arm in there, grab all those beer lines like so, then just pull off that zip tie. And then I've got to take this end off and then push 2 of the beer lines out through the opposite direction. So I've got that like that. And then 2 of these beer lines have got to go in the opposing direction. Now, if you want to be a bit clever, it's not a bad idea to actually label all your lines. So you might label them 1, 2, 3, 4, or put some colored, tape on them or something like that. But that's going to make it easy. It's easier before you do this, when I've had them in separate pieces, to actually sort of label them with a texture or something like that. So highly recommended if you have the forethought to do that. So the next step is I'm basically going to use these duotight shanks. So I've already taken this nut and concave part off, which basically unscrew that. And then obviously you've got to make sure you get all of these parts on in the right sequence is the main thing. I would start with the inside taps and then do the outside ones. It's also, I find, a little bit easier if I have this already bolted onto the top of the Kegerator as well at this stage, just so it holds the font still from, you know, moving around and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do is get these beer lines. One thing a lot of people forget, and I think I actually forgot to show this in a video or forgot to mention it in one of my previous videos, but we've got this rubber gasket. A lot of people get to the end and go, oh shit, I forgot to install the rubber gasket. So I'm just going to say put that. It's not a big deal if you didn't put it on there, but it is kind of nice because if you do put the rubber gasket on there, it just means that if you spill beer all over the top of the Kegerator, it doesn't run down inside. So, you know, not a massive deal. You know, it's still fairly airtight anyway, so you're not going to notice much air leakage without it. But if you do happen to remember to put it on, it's preferable. So I'm going to push that down there like that. So all the beer lines are now going down into the fridge. And the only real tool you need to screw this font down is just a Phillips head screwdriver. So it's probably easier actually if I pull from the inside. So open the door. Actually, once you've got enough to grab onto, just go like this and then just pull it in like that. Okay, so that's all on there like that. Then I'm just going to get these little screws here. So these are the, I think they're metric M5s, just in case you needed to know or you lost them for some reason. And then they just screw into the top there. Like so. Same thing on each side. Make sure it's nice and firm. I mean, it's pretty annoying if you happen to, if you happen to pull the taps and the font's wobbling around everywhere. I should also mention inside the fridge, there's also a coupling nut as well. So sometimes if it's shaken a little bit loose in transit or something like that, and if you notice the font's wobbling around too much, there's one little nut inside the fridge here. So there's a little nut here which does up, and that basically, there we go, that bit there, and that holds the underside of the coupling where the screws are going into a little bit harder from the base. So good to remember that. Also, before I do these screws up really tight, I just want to make sure this font is perfectly square. So it's kind of pretty close. I'm just going to move like that, and that's looking pretty good. So that's now square to the top of the fridge. I'm just going to do up these last couple of screws. Okay, that's pretty firm, I would say. Okay, so now what we're going to do, I'm going to move it over this way so you can more easily see what's going on inside. So obviously, when you're putting a 4-tap T-font together like this, you want to do the inside taps first. Obviously, if you do the outside one, that's going to be hard to get to the inside one. So yeah, with the shanks, basically they come as an assembly like this, and it has to go basically on in this same sequence that the shanks first arrive in. So basically, I'm going to get this nut like that, put that on first, then I'm going to get this convex part like that, put that on. And the last thing is I'm going to make sure I've got this duotight fitting here. So the duotight fittings basically are an 8mm to 1/4 inch reducer, or 8mm to 6.35mm reducer. One of the things that greatly increases the reliability of these duotight fittings is making sure you push the beer line in or gas line in to the correct depth. So I'm going to just show you this closely here, because we've started to do this on all the duotight fittings. If you see here, there's a little arrow there. See that arrow and line? So there's 2 arrows in line. One to know that you push the beer line into that depth from this direction, and then similarly from this direction you have to push the device into that same line on the other side. So what I like to do is just get a little texter. If you're the first time you've ever doing this, once you've done this a bunch of times, you probably get used to it and you'll start to realize how far you need to push it in. But I'm going to line the beer line, so the end of this nicely cut beer line. So I've cut this obviously with the tube cutter, so it's nice and square. Then what I've got is basically this beer line going right up to that line. And then I'm going to put a line with a texter on the outside here so I can see where it needs to go up to. So basically just go like that. And then what I do is push this duotight fitting on like this. And you can see, you know, if you push firmly, you might think, oh, I stopped there. But it's like, no, 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 it won't be very reliable. Push it all the way up to there. And there you go. You're going to have a nice tight fit. The other thing I'm going to say is I do find it, like, because it's the shank's a bit small to hold on to, I actually find it easier to get the taps out of box and put the taps on first. So don't worry about the orientation of the tap. to begin with. I'm just going to put this on in any orientation like that, just to give me, you know, a bigger handle to grip onto the whole shank assembly like that. So get this guy now, push this down into one of the middle holes like that. So see how with that opening, because of this large opening, it's really easy, just get my hand in there and push that through. Same again, I've got the shank here, making sure that I'm pushing that duotight all the way up to that line. So basically got this here, seeing where that line is here, and see how that line lines up with the end of the shank. Then I can see, you know, pretty much where that taper is how far I need to push it in. So I'm going to push this into the duotight fitting like that. So easy to do. Look, we've got away from those days we need to use any you know, hose clamps or anything like that. If you push this in firmly like that, it makes a really good, reliable connection. Then lastly, just need to push this in like so, and then do up the nut from the inside of the font. So basically I'm going to go like this, push that in. Now each tap should only take you a few minutes, so to do a whole font, look, literally it's like a 5-minute job. The first one you do probably is going to be a bit kind of confusing if you've never done this before, but if you follow the steps in this video, you know, you should be fine. So basically just going to put that in there like that, and then with one hand, look, it is a bit awkward for me in this orientation because I'm trying to not stand in the way of the camera, but you should find this a little bit easier, and then just do that nut up from the inside like this. So I generally would get that pretty firm like that. So I've got all of that like in place, but then what I do is actually kind of like with one finger grabbing onto the little nut as tight as I can, I would then actually get this tap and rotate it like that while I'm doing the nut up from the inside. That actually makes it easy to get really tight. Then once I've got it sufficiently tight, or as tight as I can with my fingers, I'll get this tool, and then this is the 7-in-1 tap tool, and I've got this sort of cutout section here, and then I get that on the back of the nut, and then kind of do the same thing. I'd actually kind of like actually going like this. Don't worry about the orientation of this, of the tap yet. I'm going to fix that up at the end. The main thing is get this nut up really tight as you possibly can, because nothing worse than when you get a, you know, font, and often, you know, if you get a font pre-assembled, sometimes people don't tighten them up enough, and I like to get them really tight, because there's nothing worse than like getting to the end of the situation and then the taps start to go all loose after a few pours, and then you have to go back and take the font apart later on. So, you know, it's a really good idea to just make sure this is super tight, as tight as you can possibly get it in here like that. So it's a nice firm connection. Okay, that is about as tight as I can get it, I think. So that's it. So obviously you do the same thing for the other taps, and then once you've got in that you know, that tap in the correct orientation, what you can do is just use this tool here, and then basically undo this, and then orientate that tap so it's in the correct orientation. Another thing I should mention with the taps is the taps come standard with no spring. If you do want to put a spring in here, it's not a bad idea, because that means when you let go of the tap, it'll automatically turn off. So if you're at a party, or you know, you've got a lot of drunken people around, and you know, naturally that's what happens with the Kegerator. You know, I think the spring is a really good idea. So you just drop that into the shank and then push it onto the, so drop that into the tap and then push it onto the shank and then do that up like so. This tool is a good all-in-one tool, but we do have some better tools as well on the website. So if you possibly wanted to get, you know, a more purpose-built tool, this really compact one, it's just a lot easier to maneuver when you've got all the taps in the way, and then this one can just, you know, do that. But, you know, this all-in-one tool is always a handy thing to have with the Kegerator, but obviously if you've got a purpose-built tool, generally they're more compact and do work a bit better as well. So that's pretty much it. Then you got the tap handle, which just screws onto the top of the tap like so. Now, of course, the standard tap is just, the standard tap nozzle, a 10mm nozzle, but obviously if you're using things like nitro, or you know, you've got other different you know, different types of tap nozzles you can put on there. You know, you can basically swap that out. You can put like, yeah, the stout tap, or other ball lock post tap nozzle and stuff like that as well. Another thing that I think I might do on this particular Kegerator is I might put on the Bishop tap handle. So this particular font, once I was, as I was saying before, all the taps are facing forward at right angles. So if you've got a tap which is like this, which has to face a specific orientation, what you do is you turn it all the way like that, And see how it's not facing the correct orientation? I rotate to the correct orientation like that. And then with this sort of collet at the base here, just turn that in the opposite direction, and that'll lock it in that orientation. So because the taps are all facing forward, I think the Bishop tap handle in particular work really well on this style of font. We've got a bunch of different recipes we sell on the website where you can actually slip a piece of paper in here, so you can actually show the actual beer brand in here, and that's a nice little feature. And there's a number of other retailers out there which are making recipes which come with like an insert which you can drop specifically into this tap handle, so you know which beer is on which tap. So the next step is to get the guardrail on. So we've got the guardrail there. Then we've got the drip tray. The drip tray just goes in like that. This is the standard drip tray, comes included. You can also upgrade to a stainless steel drip tray if you want something that looks a bit more sort of flashy, I guess. And the other thing I should mention as well before I fit the guardrail is if you're the kind of person who wants to have individual control of the gas pressures for each different beer style, look, generally most beers are carbonated to a pretty similar level and therefore use the same pressure. But if you're frequently going to like, you know, a wheat beer or an English, you know, ale or something like that, you may need to use different pressures. So if that's the case, you know, we do sell this product here. Basically, this is kind of like a kit you can put together, and this will enable you to hang this off the fridge. Some people install these into the fridge, so you can put it like, for instance, in the door or something like that, but that starts to use up a bit of space, and it's pretty tight in there with kegs, generally speaking. So this guy, it actually hooks underneath the guardrail like this. So it is a stainless steel laser cut bit of steel like that. And then when you basically ram the guardrail down like that, it allows you to basically hold that into place like so. So then you can just control the gas pressures. Now, when you're using this type of setup, when you spin the kegerator around the back, as you can imagine, the gas lines will be coming through here, and they have to feed through a relatively small PCO 38 hole here. You do have two of them, so you can you know, use two of them like that. Or alternatively, you know, you can actually switch down to the 1/4 inch line. So sometimes if you're trying to fit a lot of gas lines through a fairly small space, we've got the 1/4 inch EVABarrier which you can use to do that. So here's, like, for instance, an example of what you could do. And then basically we've got 4 gas lines going through one PCO, you know, 38 hole there like that. So look, that is an option. I won't cover that in this video because it's a bit more technical for guys who want like lots of pressures and stuff like that. So I'll leave that off this installation. And then we'll do the standard installation, which just comes with the 8mm gas line. So anyway, so just get down here and I'll show you the rest of the installation at this slightly lower level. You got the gas cylinder bracket that just goes on the back like that. Now this gas cylinder holder is generally to suit like the 2.6 kilogram gas cylinders, so these ones here. So round about that type of size. Look, even though the cylinder holder can handle or can take large cylinders, you might find that the screws here are not strong enough to necessarily take enormous cylinders. The other thing is if the cylinder's too big to go in here, it starts to go above this line and then it looks a bit ugly sticking out from the back of the fridge. So, you know, we generally don't use cylinders larger than about this size for those reasons. So that goes on there like that. Then get the Velcro strap, do it up like so. Because the regulator goes on this side of the gas cylinder, I'm going to basically use this cap on the left-hand side to basically feed the gas into. So I'm going to take this off. Now, one thing you can do is just take that off, feed the gas line directly into that hole. The second thing you can do, if you're worried about, you know, for instance, you know, this hole being too big and maybe losing some cold air out of this hole, you can actually drill a hole through that cap, then put it on there and have a tight fitting 8mm hole if you're really bothered, or you can even use a grommet. But my favorite option by far is to actually use one of these carbonation caps on there because they're quite cheap. And it means that what I can do is quick disconnect my gas cylinder and regulator from the kegerator itself and go use that for something else somewhere, or take it down to the park for a picnic or whatever, and don't need to necessarily buy another gas cylinder for that option. So I'm going to do that today. So basically I'm going to fit this up now. Because I've done that just finger tight, I do have to give this a bit of a tweak with the 7-in-1 tool to make sure it's firm. So just go like that. No Teflon tape is required here. I've got a nylon you know, washer in there, so basically, you know, you should never be using Teflon tape on your CO2 gas cylinder. Now I've got this carbonation cap and this, you know, the duotight 1/4 inch to 5/16 or 6.35 to 8mm push-in fitting. Once again, pushing those firmly together so they're joined. And then similarly with this, I'm going like this, marking it with a texter like I did before to make sure I'm pushing it into the correct depth. And then what I'm doing is pushing this gas line into the fridge like this. Okay, so that's done. Now what I'm going to do is push the gas line in that side like that. So we've got that side sorted. Do that up from the back. Now what I'm going to do is do the same thing here. So I'm going to get that texter. Going to look at that mark that I've got on the back here. Push that into this fitting here on the regulator, like so. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fit, obviously, a ball lock disconnect onto this guy here. Then you push this on there like that. And as you can see, now if I've got my gas cylinder regulator, I need to go get it refilled, I can just whip the whole thing off like that as a whole assembly, or take it and use it somewhere else. And then when I put it on the fridge, I just go like that, and I've got a quick disconnect directly on the back of the fridge. I just push in like so. So really easy. Now on the inside, all right, so when you look inside the Kegerator like this, you can see I've got a bunch of different lines in here. Now to keep things a bit more tidy, a really inexpensive thing you can buy is just these little BLTs or beer-line tidies, or they can use a big gas line as well. But I think these are kind of handy to stick on the roof of the fridge, and that way I can clip the gas lines and beer lines in here, and I can kind of coil them up and just press them in there. And that really will help you later on, especially organising and working out which line goes to which keg and all that type of stuff. So this is also something you want to install when the Kegerator is warm. Once you got a cold Kegerator, the adhesion of the double-sided 3M tape doesn't work as well. The other thing is you want to make sure it's a nice clean surface. So if it's a second-hand fridge or an old fridge, good to give it a hit with isopropyl alcohol before you stick these on too. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick these to the roof of the Kegerator. Obviously, when I've got kegs jammed in here, the walls are pretty tight from left to right, so I wouldn't want to put these on the walls. I really think if you're trying to organise your lines, I'd put this on the roof like that, and you know, you'll thank me later for this one. All right, so I've got the gas line coming in here. I've got to tee that off. So what I'm going to do is, that's just a little bit long at the moment. So I'm going to tee this off to a fairly short sort of length like this. And I've got these T-pieces that come included with the kit. So generally when we've got these multi-tap kits, we include enough T-pieces to split your gas line to enough lines to do the job as well. In fact, even that's a bit long. I might even go slightly shorter to keep it a bit more tidy in here. Okay. So once again, making sure we're pushing these to the correct depth in there. So I go like that, push this in. And then what I need to do is I also need a few short pieces like this to join them together. So I'm going to go like that. And then going to bank up all of these T-pieces like this. Oops. And while that's out, I might actually get a few of these pieces here too. Okay, so I join all these gas lines up like that. Okay, now I just need one more little short piece like this to join these two together. That pushes in there like so. Now I should say at this stage, Like, some of you might be used to using these old disconnects. We really don't use these anymore. We've started to move to a new type of disconnect where we've got the push-in fitting directly on the disconnects. These are called the duotight disconnects. And as you can see, they're more compact than these ones. They're made out of polyketones. They've got really good chemical resistance, I should say, as well. But they just sort of reduce the number of failure points too. So with these older disconnects, you know, you can either get them with barb, which then means you have to use a hose clamp, which is a bit of a pain. But obviously then there's the threaded ones. But then if you thread it on and don't do this up to the correct tightness, if you do it too tight, you can, you know, damage the plastic. If you do it too loose, then it won't seal. So really, by far, I think these are the way to go. We do have stainless steel as well. Look, some of you guys might get these cast ones or machine stainless steel ones. But honestly, in my opinion, I reckon the plastic's actually better than the stainless steel. Firstly, they can handle higher pressures, which sounds funny, but the O-rings can blow off on these. So if you're using carbonated water or something like that, or, you know, jumping up to a high pressure to, for instance, if you're, you know, force carbonating one of your kegs, you can sometimes find you disconnect these and blow the O-rings off the poppets. But these also have over-molded, you know, seals on the poppet. So it's got Santoprene over-molded onto the poppet body. So, you know, I do find them just generally more reliable, you know, so as well as being easy to use. So basically just push the line in like that. Once again, you know, you should be using that depth gauge. Look, I'm sort of getting, you know, into the installation point here. I've shown you enough of this. You probably sort of get what I mean with the texture. But going up to that marker there, and then repeat that process for the other gas lines as well. So just go like this and fit up the other gas lines. Once again, look, if you can be bothered, I would be putting a label or color coding or numbering the different gas lines so you know which one's going to each keg, and then same thing with the beer line as well. So even if you just use a bit of masking tape or something like that, that can be a good way to do it. Okay, so there we go. So I've got all them done there. And now I just have to get all my beer lines sorted. So I'm going to do the same thing with these duotight disconnects. So the beer is always the black and yellow. Just think yellow liquid gold or something like that, I guess, the best way to remember it. I'm going to trim this one down a slight bit here. Okay, then pushing these in. If you find it's a little bit too hard to push these in, if you wet them, if you wet the tube, it'll actually go in a lot more easily. Okay, that goes there like that. The other nice thing about using the push-in fittings on the beer line in particular is because, as I was saying before, when you get down to the point where you're balancing the line, you know, it's easy enough to pull the line back out again if you need to chop it and shorten the line for some reason. So that's another reason why, you know, push-ins are kind of a lot easier than barbs and hose clamps, which you have to then chop off and then rejoin. Hose clamps can be a bit of a pain in the bum. So as you can see, I've got the beer line tidies in this radial pattern. Look, I'm sure if you're really good at organising this type of thing, probably electricians and plumbers are really good at this type of thing. But anyway, I've just sort of put it in this radial type of pattern. And then to sort of get rid of some of that spaghetti, you can just push those lines in there. That way it keeps them nice and tidy like that, stops them falling all over the fridge. If you do need to, you know, pull a keg out of the fridge though, obviously they just pull out like that and just disconnect from the top. So it is a nice way to keep everything sort of really kind of organized, I guess. And as you can see, now none of the disconnects are really long, even though I've had to use that, you know, 1.5 to 2 meters of beer line to get the correct balancing, because I've got it all coiled up on the top of the fridge there. It's pretty neat. And that way I can just easily get to these disconnects and clip them on the kegs. So as you can see inside the fridge, we've got this fan at the back. Now this fan will basically turn on and blow air over the front of the kegs. You do have the ability to turn the fan on and off here, but look, honestly, if you want efficient cooling, you should just leave the fan on full bore pretty much all the time. Yeah, because that way you're going to get much more even temperature. If you turn the fan off, you might find the kegs at the back of the fridge will end up being colder than the kegs at the front of the fridge near the door. So you don't really want that. Otherwise, obviously, you know, your beer will eventually become different carbonation levels as well. So as you can see what I'm doing here, I've got this tube here. This is basically also going to blow air up the font around the beer lines and make sure that that's cold as well. The tube's actually slightly longer than what's required, so I pushed it all the way up to the top there. So see how I've got a bit of slack here. You know, you would then get a measuring tape and probably just trim this a little bit shorter, so that way it's nice and neat and just goes straight up there rather than have this excess hanging in here. But that's a good idea also, just to cool the small amount of beer which is just sitting in the font as well. I should also say with these new models they come with a light. The light basically turns on and off when the door closes and shuts there, so basically when you shut the door that'll automatically turn off. Anyway, that's all you really need to know. Lastly, I should say the beer line tidies, it's a good idea to have them so it keeps your beer lines just off this cold plate. If these beer lines are pushing right up against here, you can sometimes freeze the beer inside the lines, and then that can be a little bit problematic. Some people are like, oh, why is there no flow? And they can't work it out, and actually they've frozen a small amount of beer in here because it was just pressing right up against that cold plate. So just thought I'd give you that forewarning as well. Last but not least, it's absolutely vital you do a pressure check. Any system you just build, you need to make sure you pressure check it. So that goes for beer and also for gas. So you're checking both liquid and gas side. So when you're doing that, start with the knob all the way out. You can actually even take this all the way off the regulator like so. Turn on the gas like this, and as soon as you have gas pressure, you're going to get a reading on this needle here. Then what you're going to do is you're going to gradually turn this dial in here and until this low pressure gauge starts reading. So as I screw this in, I'll just start to feel a bit of resistance soon, and I can just sort of feel that now. So see how the pressure's going up? Now, generally what you want to do is you want to do a pressure check at 50% higher than the highest pressure you're likely to use. So most of you guys at home probably aren't going to use more than say 20 psi. There should be not much reason to, I guess. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the pressure check at 30 psi to make sure I've got enough of a safety margin there for my test pressure. So I'm going to just basically put it on 30 psi like that and just turn this off like so. And then I'm going to come back with everything all, pressurized. I'm going to come back like a day later and make sure, the needle hasn't dropped. Now, if I did have a leak, I'd come back to this and I'd probably see that the pressure will drop. So if I go like this and pull I'll simulate what a leak will look like. Firstly, you'll see this high pressure needle go down like that. And then if you have a really bad leak, you'll see that drop off. And then you'll see on this side here, the low pressure gauge will then start to drop to zero. So if you come back the next day and it's all at zero, you're like, man, I need to go back and check everything. Now, luckily, it's pretty easy to find, a leak just with some water. What you can do is disconnect, for instance, all these disconnects, and you can dunk them underwater, get a jug of water and dip the whole disconnect in water. You can't dip the gauges in water. So when it comes to actually the whole regulator itself, you just want to get some foam and then go around the joins with some sort of like, kind of like a lather of foam, which you'd almost like, shave with or something like that, for instance, and just cup all these joints and make sure it's not leaking. Some people use a spray bottle of, soapy water. I find that doesn't work as well for me, so I just generally cup foam around the joints and then see if I can find it that way. Yeah, the other thing I should say, some people put water in the kegs, and if the water is not carbonated, you will notice the pressure will drop because obviously you've got CO2 dissolving into solution into the water as well. So, we sometimes get sort of people who are just new to it think, oh, I've got a leak, and actually they don't have a leak. They're just carbonating a liquid of some sort. So yeah, just a little reminder on that one. So that's it, guys. Hope you feel you've got the confidence to put this together. Now with all the push-in fittings and stuff like that, it really is so easy to assemble one of these kits yourself at home. So no need to necessarily call the beer plumber in. If you guys want to see anything else, definitely, definitely put it in the comments below. A lot of the ideas we've got, even the, T-bar font and stuff like that, they're ideas which we've got from our customer base. So if you guys want to see us make any new other accessories, just put it in the comments. Say, look, guys, you guys should make this, or, some other new tap handle or whatever. And we most likely will make it if we get enough people make comments like that. If you want to hear about any other cool new stuff coming out, definitely bottom right hand corner, hit subscribe now. And we've got our Facebook homebrew community group. So join that one. You can talk to other people just like yourself, sharing tips and tricks on how to get the most out of the gear. Anyway, that's it, and hope to see you next time. Okay, bye.